Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up today. My name is Vaishnavi Kambudur, and I work as an assistant curator at MAP. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're going through a tough time right now, and that I thank everybody for making time. I wanted to say that Shabnam Ramaswamy from Katna's Kantha, she won't be able to make the talk today as she's feeling unwell. I really hope that she gets better soon. Having said that, I just wanted to leave one takeaway from my discussions with her before this panel discussion. Um, and she told me that Nakshi Kantha, for instance, is something which is not just about the design of the textile, it's more than that. It's about identities of women, and it is our work to kind of understand what identities of women in the embroidered textiles that make are. On that note, I also wanted to quickly introduce Ruchi and Jaya, who co-founded Indigene a decade ago. And today our panel discussion, Reimagining Cloth in Contemporary Culture, will be with them. So Shruti, who's organized this event with Shilpa, she introduced us to Jaya and Ruchi. And at the time we wondered, well, what does that really mean to reimagine cloth in contemporary culture? Like, do you do it in design? Do you do it in fashion? And I hope today's conversation with them will shed some light on it. You'll find our bios in the chat box. Also, I wanted to let you know that this specific panel discussion is an extension of the exhibition Painted Stitches and Woven Stories that we co-curated with our co-curator Anika, who's here right now. Hey, Anika. We were looking at historic kanthas in museum maps collection specifically, and how museums play a role in retaining certain art practices. Right. And for us, we also wanted people to understand that these practices exist outside of museum or academia, and how brands sustain livelihoods using these practices. Um, just wanted to also thank our ISL interpreter for today that you can see on our screen right now, Anand. Thank you, Anand. We'll now begin this discussion by a brief introduction by Ruchi and Jaya. Hey, Ruchi and Jaya, you can turn on your videos.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
We have a little video which, as an introduction, which we'd like to play.
Shruti, could you please play the video for us? Thank you.
Indigene was set up in 2011 with a passion for handmade. With several years of working with handmade textiles and techniques, both Ruchi and me found ourselves drawn towards a desire to create our own line of handmade clothing, somewhat of an amalgamation, bringing together crafts from different parts of the country. Our extensive focus always remains on the textile. The Indigene language is about using more than one craft or techniques to create a layered concept. We follow a clear design process, the inspiration, selecting or creating the base fabric, embroidery texture or motif, and the garment silhouette all in a coherent story together. Quite often, an Indigene garment goes through multiple hands and geographies before it reaches its rightful customer. Currently, Indigene works with artisan clusters specializing in different craft skills such as Sujni embroidery, Ajrak hand block printing, handloom weaving, tie and dye, and ikat weaving. Sujni embroidery is one of our key crafts and imparts a signature look to an Indigene product. We interpret this craft in a contemporary manner and a design-led thought process. Our language is more textured, usually with a play of tonal colors and definitive forms used more sparsely. Our inspiration has been from the very Eastern philosophy of recycling, be it the Gudri textiles of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Kantha quilts of Bengal, or the Japanese form of Boro, which bears a close resemblance to the Sujni of Bihar and Bengal. We started with a local group of women, mostly migrants from Bengal, Bihar, and UP, now settled in the urban slums of Delhi. Most of the women came with little or no skill in Sujni per se, but of faint memories from their villages or of their mothers and grandmothers practicing the craft back home. Some, though, were adept in their skills and made for great trainers within the group. This artisan group associated with us is mostly home based, spread out in the south and southeastern parts of Delhi. With the basic skill and training within the group, new and challenging designs, these artisans have refined their embroidery skills over the years. Indigene's efforts has been to organically grow the group in skill and number, while being able to provide consistent work and together creating an identity. We aspire to represent this beautiful and subtle embroidery technique of India through a contemporary take and quality, products that have a global appeal and are for the modern yet traditional. We strongly believe in preserving handmade and producing ethically, being mindful of creating as well as consumption. At Indigene, we reduce and reuse our fabric wastage to recreate unique products under our Relove collection. We pay keen attention to minute details such as buttons, tassels, and accents that become unique elements of an Indigene product, letting the customer discover it one at a time.
Thank you so much for this video, Ruchi and Jaya. I noticed that your single piece of clothing sometimes has so many different techniques on them, especially in your Relove collection. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in this discussion. But I would like to start with what is Indigene? What does the term Indigene mean? And how did you two meet to start Indigene?
Well, we have been classmates since college, and then at NIFT while we were doing a design course. And I think over the years, being friends, and we realized that we have a common interest in handmade and in craft. And our post design school trajectory was very craft oriented. We started working with grassroots level organizations who were working with women making handmade products, and we did several projects together. So that kind of really brought our ideas together in terms of we realized we could work in tandem. I think that's really important. And of course, the common interest in craft. And after a few years of working on projects and doing other jobs, we came together and Indigene started in 2011. So we're almost finishing 10 years. And yeah, so that is how Indigene came into being. And well, there's the history to why we called it Indigene was it was always about indigenous or native, or because we strongly feel about that a certain craft is related to a certain geography, and that's why indigenous. And over the years we didn't know, and somebody told us that indigene in fact means indigenous. It's a French word for indigenous. We didn't know that. Somebody told us that, and we were very thrilled. That's exciting. I mean, it's not just a word we have created. It exists. It does mean something relevant.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ruchi, would you like to add something?
Well, pretty much that. I think the name really came up with, we were toying with various words like Indian textiles and traditional, indigo. I mean, somewhere that was also somewhere in our mind because we were wanting to work with natural dyes. So those were a few words that came to our mind, and it just happened to be, we said, okay, just a short form for indigenous, let's call it Indigene. And so people have actually come back to us with their own interpretations of their name. So somebody says that, oh, is it because you do a lot of blues and indigos, is it called Indigene? Or as Jaya mentioned, the French connection. So that was a good surprise. Yes, so pretty much that.
Thank you for that. And sort of in relation to using natural dyes, I was looking at your fall winter collection, and I was also looking at your recent Buttercup Gold, and I was really wondering how many techniques do you use? Like there is natural dye, there's Sujni Kantha. Can you shed a light about like how many different techniques that you end up using in one piece of clothing?
So mostly it is a mix of multiple techniques, definitely 2 to 3, because both of us are trained textile designers. So our intervention actually starts from the textile phase. We like to work with the block print pattern. We like to work, play around with the weaves and their colors. So that is pretty much where the intervention starts, and so, and definitely a form of handwork on it. So wherein Sujni comes into play. Sujni is a very prominent part of our language, and we top it up with other handmade accents. Like recently for Buttercup collection, we tried crochet for the first time. So we
Okay.
have a group of women in Delhi who are skilled in crochet handwork. So they've created very, very small floral motifs of crochet, and that is something we've combined with simplified kantha embroidery. It's not a very heavy embroidery intensive collection.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's a combination of two kinds of hand embroidery skills. So like pretty much like that. And because we are, it's also about our commitment to the craft group that we work with. So we also bring around the craft into the collection in a way that the group works on it, and it looks like it's a part of, it was always supposed to be there on the product. So that's pretty much, it's a two-way process that we follow. Yeah.
Okay. So you spoke about two-way process and having craft in it. Does every collection of yours include the same craft, or do you alternate between the same craft? How do you work around it?
So Sujni definitely has been a prominent part in most of our collections, because that is pretty much our identity now. We do have Ajrak block prints, or even we work with a group in Rajasthan for block prints. So we do like to blend that with embroidery, because it also lends itself to a more unique language rather than just doing Sujni by itself. Uh, Largely, I would say print and Sujni is what we combine together a lot. And sometimes we do, like we've done work on ikat. So ikat by itself is a very extensive textile, time consuming, and a very, very strong textile. So that is something we haven't combined with Sujni yet, but maybe in future. Yeah.
Um, well, the other question that I had for you is that, when we spoke last time, we discussed sustenance and self-sustenance. What does that mean for you? And also, like when you reintroduce the same techniques like Sujni or Ajrak, block printing techniques in your collection, what is your research process? And do you think about self-sustenance when you begin your research?
So sustainability is such a broad kind of area, and we always feel kind of it's difficult to just claim sustainability, that you are sustainable and you're selling sustainably, you're creating sustainably. Well, we for us, the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about sustainability is that are we being able to sustain the artisans or people working with us throughout, which is really a big challenge as well, to have continuous work, to have the right markets, and so you're able to sustain that livelihood. uh, then of course comes the craft. Some of them are very popular. Ajrak is very popular, a lot of people use it. Sujni similarly, a lot of people are using it. um, our well, we always try to interpret it in our a certain language that indigene would be? Of course, it's Ajrak, but how do you interpret it differently so that, there are times that people would ask you, oh, really, is this Ajrak? Because, you have a certain image of Ajrak in your mind, or even Sujani for that matter. So sustainability, I think, is mainly that for us. Largely, the livelihood can be sustained work for our people,
Mhm.
and the forms of using handmade textiles or hand done techniques automatically are sustainable, because that is how they were supposed to be. We've created it mechanically. We have factories to produce a large amount. I mean, we have to be very conscious of how much we are producing. So a lot of times for us, the challenge is if you're combining techniques and then the product is going to several places, are we going to be able to even produce it to present it to the market? Is it even feasible? But yeah, so it's like a jigsaw puzzle, putting everything together and trying to get there. Yeah, Ruchi might want to add something.
Yeah, about the craft, first of all, of course, working with something that's traditional craft, so sustaining the craft itself, because almost every craft is now being compromised for something machine made or something digital. So our clear decision or choice to work with handmade, whatever form it is our way of looking at sustainability. Sustaining livelihood, sustaining artisan partnerships, definitely, and also being aware of all the processes that go into making the product. So from the fabric till the packaging, uh, we try to kind of be environmentally conscious of every step that we have into the making of the product. And that's our way of looking at sustainability as far as indigene goes. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw that, when I looked at your website, you are very clear about something being hand spun, hand dyed, hand embroidered. Um, how would you expect the users of Indigene's clothing to sustain that in terms of maintenance, or in terms of, being aware of what that means?
Wear it many times. We just hope that whatever somebody buys, um, can wear it several times. And we keep saying that our clothes are something that uh, we don't want to ever label it as occasion wear, because occasions are few. Everyday clothing, something that makes you feel comfortable. And so I think the best way to uh, you know, uh, the optimum use of a garment is when you wear it so many times that you leave it in tatters eventually, and you just don't want to part with it.
Mm.
So, and our maintenance of our clothing is not very difficult. We usually suggest hand wash separately, of course, line dry and shade, because some of these natural dyes could fade. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, we seldom say dry cleaning. It's only if it is really important. If it's a combination of fabric being used, like say in a jacket. So when a
Or a
lining is a
silk or
different
something.
fabric and the top is a different fabric, then of course we say dry cleaning, because washing could behave differently, and that could spoil the garment. But yeah, maintenance is hand wash.
We also
Okay.
try to communicate it enough and many times to the viewer or the consumer through our website, through our social media, about the different processes and the care that that particular process needs. So many a times, most of the times, people understand, uh, and we are always there to answer questions if they have any for the product. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to quickly segue into, we do have a question and answer for about 15 minutes before the discussion ends. So I just wanted to let our audiences know as well, and they can type it up on our chat box at the bottom of our screen. Yeah. Ruchi and Jaya, that was a great insight into self-sustenance. Through that, I wanted to ask you about how do you, your video spoke of how you have these makers based in Delhi, but they migrated from, different parts of India, specifically UP, Bihar, and Bengal. Um, how do you kind of, work with them? What is their input to your work, to your creative process as well?
So largely, this is this group we've known now ever since we actually started Indigene. It somehow happened that we managed to connect with them through common sources, and it's grown from 5 to almost 40 odd women now. Because most of these are people who migrated for small odd jobs, like working in fact the husbands must be working in factories or security guards and stuff, and the women have some kind of embroideries. They had some kind of embroidery skills already, which have refined over time. So largely the creative process has been the creative direction mostly has been from our side, but a lot of input has gone into uh, upping their skill, because that is something that's when we say kantha, one can see an array of skill in the kantha stitches. So we really want them to have a very, very refined embroidery skill. And so yeah, creatively, but there are times when we also co-create. So like especially for our Relove collection, we have done few pieces wherein we've given them scraps and we've given them base fabric and asked the few of them to basically put it together the way they want. So by giving little in like a little kickstart to them, and then showing them some reference images, etc. And so it's been good, like they've managed to put similar colors together. Like now they know that if it is Indigene, this is the kind of work they're going to be doing. It's going to be slightly heavy embroidery, the colors are going to be tonal. So they've understood that kind of a language of Indigene after having worked with us for so many years. So that is the kind of creative exchange that we have sometimes, although many a times it is given by us and they mostly execute. But yeah, it's a good change to also let them express their creativity the way they want.
And I think what I would like to say here is that, when you're working with craft, there's always a certain level of co-creation, because you might visualize something as a designer on paper or, on your digitally. But eventually what comes out could be very different, be it prints or be it natural dyes or even embroidery. I mean, your shapes could change, your forms could differ a little, and every hand works differently. So eventually, the final product, anyways, would be an interpretation of the person or the technique itself. So yeah, this co-creation would always happen.
That's interesting. So what happens in terms of co-curating both the textile and the garment? Like how many changes happen? Because you both of you, as you said, that you come from a textile design background. So I'm interested to know what happens when that cloth gets translated into clothing. And you can talk a little about your Relove collection also, if you want to base it on something specific.
So cloth, I think the at the cloth level itself, sometimes there is a difference. Like, especially we would say when we work with our Ajrak printers. And because it's natural dyes and it has so many factors that affects it, from weather to water to print paste to, who's handling it, everything, the washing. Sometimes when we go to our groups to, develop our certain sampling collection, uh, it looks absolutely different. And when you place an order for several other meters of it to be produced, to be made into garments or whatever, it looks, so from a mocha it could become a coffee. So it's like you have to wait for that element of surprise. Similarly, like, even embroidery, the first samples come out because you probably have closely interacted and you have sat there and said, okay, exactly this size and this size. Of course, they use a lot of khakas and impressions before they do embroidery. But eventually, there is when you see it, somebody's embroidery could be very dense, somebody would be a little more spaced, and kantha, because it's more sort of visually, got that texture kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
the texture can vary. So yeah, there's several kinds of variations that you see. But I think it's interesting because there's that beauty in imperfection. So and it's unique eventually. And even if two people have the same garment, they might look different.
Yeah,
Look closely. Yeah,
so that is part of your sort of ethos of what you do.
yes.
So if I picked up two different garments from your collection, I mean similar garments of say different sizes, it could be possible that the stitches might be slightly different.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Even the print, or like, because the variation could happen at any level. So yeah, I'll let Ruchi talk about the re-love.
Ruchi,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, so Relove is primarily an extension of our. We were already doing, fabric scrap utilization. We were calling it Gudri, and Relove is largely an extension of that. So apart from just using our fabric scraps, production scraps into creating new products, uh, we decided that why not? There are many ready garments that either get defective or they fade in color, uh,
Mhm.
either lying in stock, or even for even with customers. Now we've been there for 10 years, so there are people who even have been wearing our 7-8 years old collections. So it was basically an idea to kind of bring back those old pieces and create something new with it. So basically a defective garment is also reclaimed and made into another product. So uh, embroideries don't go bad. So if it's a dress with a very lovely embroidery, one would observe that after many times of wearing, the embroidery is still there, but say the fabric is now little weak, or it's giving way. So Relove is a way to just reusing that precious piece of like precious patch of hand embroidered fabric, and putting it into combining it with the other scraps and creating more products. So the line is yet to be out, because they are
Okay.
all going to be unique pieces. No two are going to be the same in color or pattern, but they are going to be more like generic products. So more say free size jackets or other products, like we're trying to do some home furnishings. So yeah, we're hoping to launch it this year, in a couple of months. And yeah, so that's
And we
so.
would like to encourage our customers to, so it's like a full cycle, that whole circular, the circular design process that
Mhm.
we everybody's been talking about now. We would like to encourage our customers that, once they've worn an indigene garment several times, and now they're like Ruchi said, that you can't wear it anymore, and you feel sort of you don't have space in the cupboard, you don't have a hand me down option, then they can send it to us, and we will turn it around into something else. So then, we're trying to, so when we launch it, we are going to come out with that idea to our customers, and I hope it will be well taken.
I'm sure it will be. Also, like going back to repurposing, it reminds me of Kantha because even our historic Kanthas were, placed, old cloth was taken and then a lot of embroidery was done on it to retain that cloth. How many times do you think there is a possibility for that to happen? Say you have the Relove collection and then, I have it, with me, and then again a few years pass. Is there a possibility for me to give it back to you to reinterpret that?
Maybe.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of actually a lot of the archival pieces or say even traditional garments of say Gujarat or Rajasthan that you might see, which have really exquisite work. The patches keep coming back, and then they are again used into something else. Like one can just buy patches and create a new product. So similarly, definitely it gets more life, because now there are multiple layers of fabrics that have been added into it, so it becomes a stronger product. But it can always be given back to us, and maybe we'll add another touch of some kind of a repair embroidery, or if it's completely gone, then we will cut it and probably make it into another product. So that kind of possibility always exists. And nobody wants to, one doesn't want to get rid of a well done piece,
Yeah.
right? Like a really artisanal piece, one doesn't want to give, like, just throw it away. So we'll always find a way to repurpose it.
And I think it'll keep the ideas will keep coming to us as we receive something like that, or we have it. When you have it in front of you, then you start thinking of what you can recreate out of it.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Kind of going a little more into the makers, the artisans that you work with. Somebody like me, like I don't get to hear a lot from the makers, especially during the pandemic when we can't really visit their spaces. So do you have specific makers that you want to talk about? Somebody that you learned from? I can see that you have these craft travel series on Instagram where Ruchi, I saw a post of you with Ruxana Begum where you said that, oh, she taught me these little intricate details too. And, I was looking at these images and I was like, there are so many leadership qualities that you can learn from and that we don't really get to hear about it. So if both of you can kind of share certain anecdotes, we would be grateful to hear that.
Yeah, so well, talking about Ruxana Begum, yeah, so she's a master artisan in Kamdani. Kamdani is not something that we worked in our collections, any of our collections yet, but
Mhm.
we were lucky enough to do a project with them, and it was a completely new experience for us, because we were working with these women who largely belong to the Muslim community in the city of Lucknow. So and Ruxana ji herself is like highly skilled in various kinds of crafts from the region. So it's good to see how women being in their own homes are also such uh, great leaders, because just mobilizing neighborhood women, getting them for a workshop on dot on time, and basically starting
Mhm.
at 9, finishing at 5, keeping them excited through the day, directing them in terms of do it like this, do the stitch like that, hold the fabric like this, and this is the right way, demonstrating. It's just an enriching experience to be working with a master craftsman. Similarly, when we work in Kutch with our printer family, so printing is a large, it involves many more people, like Jaya had mentioned, that there's a dyer, there's the washer, there's the block printer. So one is that it's a largely male led craft. So for us to go there and work with these men, trying to tell them that okay, this is what we want, and well, they've of course now evolved a lot because of interacting with designers over many years. But it's an interesting it's a very interesting experience to be there, standing there and getting like working together, to we decide on colors right on the table. uh, After washing, we realize that, oh, this shade is not happening, now what do we do? So for them also, it's a those 1 week or whatever we are there sampling, even for them it's an enriching experience, I think, because on a daily basis they don't get to explore their creative side. So largely they're just producing fabrics and replicating what they're doing. So exchanges with us also helps them to explore their creative side and probably learn something, what express something that they've learned in past and things like that. Yeah. maybe Jaya would like to add something from the
Well, I
embroidery
mean,
group.
I would say that our anecdotes while traveling have been wonderful. One is working with them, and the way they just kind of welcome you into their family. So, eating with them. When we go to Kutch, all our meals are with them, and with Rukhsana Begum, she was ready to make kebabs for us. I mean, she didn't have the time for it, but it's really kind of enriching in the sense of getting to know the culture really close, because we don't belong to that region or the language or whatever else. But it has always, I think that was one thing that really pushed us to carry on with craft. After students started, as we started working, Ruchi used to work with Urmol and I used to work with Seva Mandir in Udaipur. And our connections are so close with these artisan women, and us visiting their homes in the village, and it's very welcoming. It's very refreshing. It's not pretentious. It's kind of like it's really, you enjoy the entire experience. So it's a work and fun.
Also, they are very open to sharing all that they have, like whether it's the skill or whether it is just showing all that they have done. Like just Rukhsana Begum, for example, she brought out her whole almirah of these lovely looking samples in very very delicate embroidery applique, all kinds of techniques, and she like took us through each piece and shared stories on each of them. So it was like it was actually like sitting in a textile class for us. So it's just that how open they are into sharing their work with us. I mean, designers, I think, often tend to be very secretive about their work, and we are whatever said and done, everybody's insecure. But with artisans, I think they are so open, and they just want to show all that all the skill they have, and whatever they whatever kind of craft they possess. So which is very it's very humbling. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. I was thinking about this. You spoke of makers who came from an already like a background where they've learned this from their mothers and their grandmothers, and then there were others with different skill sets. And again, I know Shabnam ji is not here because she was talking about this thing that she makes sure that their identity is retained in the stitches. Like if they want to make a central flower in the kantha, she makes sure that she does it in their style. But have you ever had those requests? Like how do you also, like asking you about, like, do some of the makers also practice this for themselves after they come back from the 9 to 5 job? Does that happen, that they engage in their own creative process for themselves?
I think the women group, at least the women that we work with, they never were the highly skilled artisan category, the kinds that Shabnam ji works with. So these women, the Kantha women that Shabnam ji works with are very, very, they're highly skilled. So of course, and so they also come with a very rich culture of practicing themselves the craft. Now here, these migrant women, like we mentioned in the intro as well, was they come with little or sort of mediocre knowledge of needlework.
Okay.
So which can be, you can sort of develop it into, and some of them do they have evolved into really highly skilled artisans. So that I would say is a difference why they don't have a set identity of wanting to create something of their own, because they don't come with that sort of a cultural background. They've known of somebody doing it in their family, they've seen it, but they haven't practiced it themselves till now. And as far as it goes about them using the skill for their own products, they do actually. Some of them will say that maine kurta banaya tha, or my daughter made that. She also does it at home with me, so she's made something. So they do use the skill to create their own thing.
So do you think that they're learning from you, developing their skill, and also sort of sharing those skills in their family and around it?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely evolving in their skills, and they have an I mean, we try to push their limits sometimes. Can we make it more dense? Can we make it more sort of complicated and stuff? They do it, and yeah, and I'm sure they are happy to use it on their little blouses or kurtas or whatever they want to, or sarees,
Pillow covers.
pillow covers. Yeah.
The beauty
That's
of home-based craft also is that, especially when the mother is working, the girl will always pick up the needle and learn something. So then, you're passing on the skill to the next generation. And there are mother-daughter duos in our group as well.
Mm.
So probably the daughter was in her college when she started working. She got married, and she still, whenever she comes back, she'll work on our pieces. So it's that kind of a
Informal training.
informal training. So that it helps. It's a good way to expand the group and keep the craft alive. Yeah.
Sounds good. I think we're getting a lot of questions on the chat box. I'm going to ask you one final question, and you can take your time to answer it because we have good amount of time. So my question is how important is it to be able to retain the practice but also sustain livelihoods? I know that we haven't spoken about fashion too much right now, but when you look at the fashion system, and yes, there are terms like slow fashion and fast fashion, and we know that we can't really determine what is what when you're working when you're working with production systems, right? So for you, how important it is, like even if you were giving a message to artists and designers out there who are users of contemporary clothing, makers of contemporary textiles, what message would you give them, and how important is it for you for everybody to practice that as well?
So to sustain livelihood is definitely is important because because that is what is also creating your product. So of course your market is it's like a they're bound together. So what you create is your identity, and like you said, slow fashion. So if it's fast fashion, you can just cut, make, create. You can churn out a selection every month, and it can be, of course, with e-commerce, it can be up on your website and ready to sell. But when you are trying to also sustain livelihood, then your thought process or your design process is such that you have to follow certain steps to reach that product that you want to create. And that cannot be fast. It will take its time. So you will have to think, conceptualize, sample. Sampling is the longest process for us. It's as good as producing. So so sample and then get on to producing and then to the market. So so I think that is slow fashion. And slow fashion, unless you're sustaining something, somebody, some craft, some people, uh, then you can't call it slow fashion.
Ruchi, do you want to add something to that? That was well said. Thank you for answering all of the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, well, sustaining livelihood is the most important thing, because only if the livelihood is sustained will the craft be alive, or craft will also be sustained if we've decided to work with it. And it's also about learning a lot from your own collections, and how the market is responding, and while keeping the craft intact, how do you evolve your design, or how do you make it more appealing to people, keeping the story still alive, but not um, not going overboard or completely cutting down on the hand element. So it's important to give the livelihood for sure. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to moderate some of the questions. We have a lot of questions, so I might combine some of them. Our first question is from Archana, who says, how has the pandemic affected you? And what measures have you taken to address those challenges and problems that you might face? Similarly, Kamlesh also asks, how has COVID affected the crafts and livelihood of the artisans with whom you work? And again, how has this affected Indegene, but also you?
I think COVID has affected everyone and all walks of life, all businesses, crafts, yes, and unfortunately now that it is spread in the rural so much, there are a lot of artisans who have been affected. As far as our group or our studio or our set of women are concerned, I think a constant communication has played a very important role in keeping them here and not going away, because I think that is very important. That the whole migration right now, the the problem of any manufacturing sort of business or the whole manufacturing industry is the migrants, is the laborers, people who've gone off, or the workers who have gone away to their villages. So I think the communication has played a very important role for us to keep calling or speaking to them, checking on them. Similarly, we would get calls. Last month, both of us were down with COVID, and we got constantly got calls from our artisans and our people asking us if we were fine. And I think it is that I think communication. Of course, the business gets hit, and then you work your ways around to bring it back, and that's all commercial. But really, to have your back end secure, to keep your people secure, is very important. And so the same thing with our staff at the studio, our master G, our tailors, our office people. Um, we've made sure that all of them got vaccinated as soon as all of them could, because most of them are under the 44 category, and that has been difficult. But yeah, we're very happy that all of them have gotten vaccinated now. So that's just one step. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I hope it answers your question, Sanjana and Kamlesh. Now we have a question from Sujata, who says, Relove is an excellent idea. So much what we use turns up in the ground. Giving them a new life is something that we all should be doing. So she asks, are your garments free size? Uh,
So we have a lot of, well, our garments are easy fit mostly, but we do have sizes, small, any size. We also customize for specific sizes. But again, we have, sometimes we do have free size garments as well on our collection that we create. Like every time the collection will surely have a few garments which are free size. So
Thank you for that. And then now Sanjana says, what are the ways in which Indegene tries to define their presence in a market where multiple fashion and textile designers are exploring similar clothing styles? And she says that in terms of colors and patterns.
Well, yes, it is. It is a difficult world. It's very competitive. There are a lot of people doing the same thing and similar stuff and good stuff. Everybody is a lot of homegrown brands are now talking about sustainability and craft, and so I think the identity, keeping your identity together and talking about the story behind your product has always been very important, which we try to emphasize as much as we can through our social media and our website and things like that, so that people know what goes behind the product. So for people to also understand what they want to pick out of the large basket of available things that they have. Uh, so in terms of design and color, I think over the period of time we have managed to create a signature look, because customers have told us that. So it's very difficult as a designer to know if you have managed to achieve that signature, because every time you're creating and you have biases in your mind, and you keep maybe repeating things or whatever. But what some of our customers have told us is that they have managed to pick out an Indigene on a rack of a mix, and so they know what Indigene is, the language. They understand that. So I think, yeah, we have our sort of reiteration from there.
I would also like to add that somewhere the clothes are a reflection of both of our identities, because we are also wearers of our own products. It's not that we are just making for the outside world and not experience the product first, not experiencing the product firsthand. So whatever silhouettes we create, or whatever patterns we make, or whatever colors we are drawn to, is a reflection of our both of our individual personalities and probably our choices together. And that has in fact, that would have definitely helped us create that identity, along with all that multi-level craft that happens on the product.
Yeah, absolutely. Like multiple identities kind of are present in like one piece of garment as opposed to like one person working on one, one form. And I think that's good to point out. Now we have a few questions about, your work with skilled or unskilled or like different levels of skills. Like for instance, Anchal says, what were some of the struggles that you faced at the start of your business? And how did you locate the artisans you worked with?
So some of the connections that we made were already artisans that we got to know of, in our years of working in the craft sector, or both me and Jaya were respectively working with different organizations and projects. So that is where we crossed paths with artisans and groups that we eventually connected for Indigene. For the Kantha group, as mentioned, we literally put this group together one by one, with women adding one by one. It was a lot of also word of mouth, and basically a skilled woman would get 4-5 women around her, like neighbors, her 4-5 neighbors together, and teach them how to work, and they eventually became part of the group. So yeah, it's been more organic than actually just identifying some artisan and working with them.
Thank you for that, Ruchi. And now we have a question by Sarita, who says, do you think it is to your advantage to be working with less skilled than very skilled, as skilled would have sometimes have set ideas? I think she's asking you about, the
Yeah.
skills that.
No, I think it's always a challenge to work with less skilled, because you might have too many expectations, and they don't come through just immediately. And yes, of course, but we also work with highly skilled like the Ajrak printers, and we've not faced that problem. They have been open to um, experimenting with us. But again, I would say communication plays a very, very important role here as to how do you communicate, or what your rapport with your artisan group is, or the artisan itself. And so if you have a good communication, a good rapport, they are open people, and they are happy to experiment with you. And so that is for the highly skilled. So but with the lesser skilled, it's always a big challenge. So it's, in fact, sometimes it could be frustrating, because you're thinking of something that you really want to do this, and you've been visualizing, conceptualizing, but it does not come out the way you want it to. So you might have to also scrap your concept several times, because it's not fitting the skill level.
In relation to that, Abhismrita also says, your thoughts on how to boost this really unique and valuable space of learning. Because she again talks about informal apprenticeship at home, and through which like skills are passed down are crucial. So how would you approach that? I was thinking that, I saw your social media post about design workshops that you do to improve skills. Would you want to talk about that and also answer this?
So these workshops are mostly they are commission projects by an organization, or it could be by an institute like NIFT or NID, or they get a lot of these skill development workshop projects now. So in which we are basically aligned to a certain craft group, and the craft group would often either have would have medium to low skills, not highly skilled, but they will have one or two people who will be well skilled and trained in that particular craft, because they also become like uh, trainer or trainer of what is it called?
Skill trainer.
They become skilled trainers. Sorry. Um but yeah, so we primarily come into play by wherein we bring in new design concepts in terms of motives, in terms of product explorations, which gives a new definition to the craft. That is where we come in. Yeah.
Sounds good. And in relation to learning, we also have Sunanda who asked us two questions. One is how has the pandemic hit the craftspeople, that you already answered during the lockdown. But she says, while completing a new collection, and how are you keeping the mood or lifestyle updated of the craftsmen during this pandemic? Because it may have hit several people to lose their job. Uh,
Yeah,
Perhaps,
trying to
yeah.
find them as much work as possible, because that is what is going to keep the livelihood going and their lifestyle, or their expenditures in check. So yeah, so that has been our thing. So we, of course, there has been almost a month and a half delay into what we were wanting to. We were already conceptualizing and we wanted to bring out another collection, but it has gotten delayed. But nonetheless, we're working on it, and we have a few orders as well that we which got stalled because of the surge, which is all coming back now, and people are sort of gearing up to work. So yeah, just crossing our fingers that no more surges. Hopefully, it can go smoothly.
Yeah. We have Deepika asking you, I think that we're also getting a lot of appreciation for how you train people and provide them livelihoods, and that they love your company's model and the clothes. But what are your thoughts on other designers who use mass-produced textile or fashion production and traditional looking crafts instead of crediting and including local artisans in the process?
Well, I mean, I don't think we should comment on anything. I mean, that is their perspective, and they probably that is how they think, or they would like to pursue their product. And so, yeah, not much to say. Similarly, I'm sure they don't have much to say for people like us. So, yeah.
Okay, great. I hope that answers for you, Deepika. We have again two questions from Natasha, who says, how might the experience of displacement and migration be impacting the skills, connections to heritage and identity of women? Okay, she also says in context of women working with Shabnam ji. Natasha, unfortunately, I don't know if we can answer on behalf of Shabnam ji right now. I really wish she was here. Uh, but maybe if you, Ruchi and Jaya, if you want to address migration a little bit about.
Well, I mean, we are working with the migrants who are here in the city. So it's
Yeah.
the other side of the story really for us.
Yeah.
And as migrants in an urban space, especially women, I think a work like this gives them an outlet to explore more than just the household, because some of them would end up being house helps, or um, there are very few women. You will see fewer urban sort of lower socioeconomic group women going and working in factories, because mostly male dominated. So you would find them as maybe house helps, or some sort of I mean, I can't think of, but something, a work like this helps them to stay at home, take care of their households, and still do something which is dignified, which is they don't spend 8 hours working. They can decide their timings as to work hours, and do equal amount of their home chores or take care of their kids. And well, that's only in context of migrants who are here. But well, of course, the other question, the question was different. But well, whatever. This is our perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
It's a big thing of financial independence as well, because coming from the village to such a big city, and then probably it doesn't even cross their mind that they can take up a job and work somewhere. So this is like bringing the opportunity right into their homes, uh, and wherein within their secure environment they can still become financially stable or contribute to their financial stability of the house. So it's
Yeah.
And how
empowering.
exciting it is for women if they have their own monies to spend on themselves, which they seldom do. Of course, they save more for their kids, but even little things like they get their payment and then they want to spend on a sari or on bangles or something that excites them, which which is which is exciting, I think.
absolutely. And you see self-sustenance
Everyone,
there as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the last question for today is by Shruta Kirti Datta, who says, how do you negotiate the market's need for a contemporary style or silhouette with a very traditional craft practice like the Kantha? And then they talk about how can living tradition like Kantha making, which began within a home where certain motifs or stitching were passed on generationally, survive within the free market. Perhaps you can answer the first one by you.
The
Yeah.
second looks more like Shabnam ji could
Exactly.
answer better.
Shabnam ji would have answered that really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead with the first.
The first one, could you just say that question again?
Yeah. How do you negotiate the market's need for a contemporary style or silhouette with a very traditional craft practice like Kantha?
So I think being trained as designers, we try to visualize the traditional in a contemporary format, and with a lot of research now, when you go to the market, you see the kind of styling. So you can contemporize the garment silhouette. You can keep the embroidery traditional. Several mix and matches of how you can put together a product which is accepted in the current contemporary urban global market rather. So we also have a small clientele globally, which so they buy from us and they enjoy wearing it. So it's not necessarily a kurta for them. So it could be a dress, contemporizing on the garment. The use of embroidery, like Ruchi was mentioning about our buttercup gold this time, and how we've combined it with crochet. So it looks absolutely different. Nobody would look at it and say it's me, but well, the technique is that, and it has been combined with this other technique to give it another look and feel. The Ruchi, I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, I also feel that the segment that will appreciate handmade is still it's still a niche segment. So we can never reach out to the mass that's buying fast fashion or buying high street fashion. Plus, in addition to what Jaya said about being us being trained as designers, so we visualize the product. We visualize the end product, and then we kind of break it down backwards and apply the craft on it. So it's always a marriage between the traditional and the modern. Clothing also now has become it's become very global. There's nothing really largely like it's become global. There's nothing really traditional unless one is talking of occasion wear or wedding wear. The everyday clothing has become pretty much global. A woman in Paris will also walk down the street with a dress and a pair of pants, and a woman in Delhi or Bombay will also be seen wearing similar kind of clothes. So it's become kind of homogeneous right now, and I think that's the area where we play in. Yeah.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much for answering questions for for our audience and also for me as the moderator. So this was the final question. So thank you so much for this panel discussion. I know we went through a lot of changes. So thank you for answering all our questions and for showing us your video. I also would like to thank Shruti, Shilpa, Anika, Anand here for our ISL interpretation and all our audiences. There's the link to the exhibition Painted Stitches Woven Stories. If you haven't seen it yet, it's free. You just have to sign up. So have a look at that. But thank you so much. I hope everybody took away something from this talk. We covered, we covered contemporary fashion. We covered slow textile making, but also most importantly, livelihood and the makers that worked with Indegene. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, MAP, for giving us this opportunity to talk about Indegene.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.